It's a question of equality. For example, when you say mankind, it sounds as if you're only talking about men, but when you say human beings or people, then you include both men and women. Why should we use gender-neutral language? Well, first of all, it describes the world the way it really is, as I said. And secondly, it carries positive connotations, or images. If children grow up hearing the word chairman, then they internalize the idea that all leaders are men, which isn't true. The title of this lecture is Gender and Language. I'm going to specifically discuss the topic of sexism in language. I'll describe what this is, and then discuss ways to avoid it. It turns out that language conveys a lot of messages about gender, and a clear example is what we call gender-specific terms. Many terms, like mailman or policeman, are gender-specific. They all refer to men, yet there are women who do these jobs. Good morning. Please take notes on today's lecture. Everyone should pick up his pen, or rather, everyone should pick up her pen, or everyone should pick up his or her pen, or her or his pen. Wait, let me start again. Everyone should pick up their pen. Is that correct? You get my point, right? In the sentence I just said about picking up your pen, I was forced to choose a pronoun. And when I did that, I faced a difficult choice about how to address my audience. The title of this lecture is Gender and Language. I'm going to specifically discuss the topic of sexism in language. I'll describe what this is, and then discuss ways to avoid it. First then, is it true that language can be sexist? The answer is yes, it can. Take the example of this word, Mr. What word has the same meaning for women? Well, as any student of the English language knows, there is none. There's Mrs., which means I'm married. There's Miss, which means I'm not married. And then, since the 1970s, we've had Ms., which means it's none of your business whether I'm married or not. Well, not exactly, but you get my point, right? After all, men don't have to let you know their marital status. They're all called Mr. In fact, it turns out that language conveys a lot of messages about gender, and a clear example is what we call gender-specific terms. Many terms, like mailman or policeman, are gender-specific. They all refer to men, yet there are women who do these jobs. Increasingly so, in fact. So what do we do? Well, a safe option is to use what we call gender-neutral terms, such as mail carrier or police officer. Why should we use gender-neutral language? Well, first of all, it describes the world the way it really is, as I said. And secondly, it carries positive connotations, or images. If children grow up hearing the word chairman, then they internalize the idea that all leaders are men, which isn't true. Third, it's a question of equality. For example, when you say mankind, it sounds as if you're only talking about men, but when you say human beings or people, then you include both men and women. But we need to look beyond using non-sexist vocabulary. Grammar is a problem too. Do you remember the example I gave at the beginning? Everyone should pick up blank pen. Well, I wasn't really making a joke. The fact is I have to choose a pronoun, and I don't want to give the impression that everyone in the room is male or female either. So I'm facing a dilemma. What's the solution? Well, personally, I prefer to say everyone should pick up their pen. I realize this is not grammatically correct, but it does avoid sexism, and as far as I'm concerned, that's very important. Incidentally, you'll find that most university professors and writers would probably make the same choice that I do. Pick up the newspaper, or look around you on the bus or on the subway, and you'll see plural pronouns in places you might not expect. Now I'd like to organize the second part of the lecture around your questions. I can see that some of you have questions on your mind, so please, go ahead and ask them.
Professor Gabbis, I'm sorry, but is all this concern about language really important? I mean, aren't there more serious issues facing women today?
You know, I understand what you're saying, and of course there are many serious issues facing women. I mean, there are so many that I could mention. The AIDS crisis, workplace inequality, the way the mass media treats women, that is, the way they stereotype women, and so on. But I'd like to point out that in addition to these issues, the language question is also on the minds of international organizations, such as the United Nations, who try very hard to avoid sexism in their publications. You see, the issue isn't just the words themselves, but the ideas behind the words. Have you ever thought about the roles that boys and girls play in children's literature? It often seems that the boys are the ones having all the fun, having adventures and so on, while the girls just stand in the background, smiling sweetly. Women tend to be pushed to the background in society. By focusing on the language we use about women, we may be able to change their expectations.
I have a question about the relationship between the way we think and the way we talk. For example, if we say chair instead of chairman, do you really think we'll start imagining more women in powerful positions?
Again, that's a very interesting question. And yes, it's true that we don't completely understand the relationship between language and thought. So, does what we say affect what we think? The answer is probably yes. I, for one, would say that if we speak about people in certain ways, that definitely has an influence on the way we think about them. Imagine a little girl who grows up hearing chairman, chairman, chairman. What is she going to think of when she hears this word? Well, a man, of course. But we must give young people the idea that women can also enter the professional world and be successful. Any more questions?
Professor Gavis, does this controversy about how we use language exist in other languages too?
Yes, it's definitely receiving more and more attention worldwide, but remember that the feminist movement, which is so active in the United States, has been a major force behind the move to avoid sexist language. It's a complicated issue, however, because the issues of gender in language change from one language to the next. For example, nouns don't have a gender in English, but there are two genders for nouns in Spanish, masculine and feminine. And German has 3 gender groups. Some nouns are masculine, others are feminine, and then there's a third category, which isn't masculine or feminine. So each language has its own gender issues. You might want to take a look at some newspapers or magazines to see how they avoid sexism in English. Well, we have to leave it there for today. Thank you.